Hello there, fellow string slingers and guitarists of YouTube and the internet in general. As guitarists and as musicians, we are spoilt for choice with genre, but yet we're all creatures of habit and passionately stick to our favorite genres. But as artists, particularly as guitarists, we should do ourselves the favor of diving deep into these 5 genres, not only to learn new techniques and come out as a more interesting player on the other side, but also to broaden your tonal landscape and avoid being put into a stereotype for whatever genre you find yourself particularly in. Brandon Valentine here, and this is 5 genres every guitarist should listen to, regardless of what genre you like. So obviously I'm not going to go through and mention rock, metal, punk, pop, singer-songwriter stuff, or the 40 million different types of hardcore. Because as brilliant as these genres are, they are very popular and very common in the spectrum of guitar, and they have a lot more in common with each other than you think. A pretty damn heavy reliance on basic major and minor scales, pretty much everything being in 4/4. And since these traits are so common and so prolific throughout the landscape of guitar, players and artists and bands that step out of this and learn things from outside the box develop their own really unique and interesting voice. Number 1, jazz. Everyone expects it, but here we go. Jazz can be a bit of a brain melter upon your first foray into it, particularly if you don't know any theory, or if you're going in blind. But it's a very deep and tonally rich style of music that'll show you a lot of very interesting relationships between notes, particularly between the relationships of chord voicings and lead. 2 things that you should absolutely take away from jazz are 1, it's chord voicings. It doesn't matter what style of music you live in, your playing and particularly your songwriting will be greatly enriched by having a broader knowledge of chords and chord voices to bring to the picture, other than power chords and open chords and the regular types of chords that you find so commonly throughout guitar music. This even applies to the punk crowd. If you want a perfect example of this, go listen to Propagandi's Tartirum non datur off the album Supporting Cast. It is brilliant and amazing chord voices for a high gain song with all the fury of punk. Banger! And secondly, with jazz, there is the relationship between the lead and the rhythm. Now, with more complicated chord voicings comes much more specificity that is needed with your lead playing. We're saying in a rock situation, someone goes, we are going to be soloing over E flat minor, and these are the chords, and this whole part, and most likely the whole song is in E flat minor. But with jazz, each chord can nearly have its own scale attributed to it. It will allow you to highlight and emphasize different tones and have this really interesting ebb and flow between the chords. And as a side note, if you're getting into jazz or having a listening to jazz and you want a little bit more of a, shall we say, indulgent, guilt-free guitar love, do yourself a favor and go have a listen to some Gypsy Jazz. Gypsy Jazz takes a lot of principles from jazz, including similar kind of chord feels, but it has a much more fun, swinging and swaggering kind of feel, particularly with lead guitar. If you go and have a listen to the Rosenberg Trio or Django Reinhardt, their phrasing, the way they phrase their leads, has such a cheeky kind of swing to it. Number 2, it's prog. It's prog. Many of us internet-dwelling guitarists, myself included, listen to prog on a pretty grand scale already, whether it be to Animals as Leaders, Periphery style, modern prog, your Tesserex or Leprous, or to your more vintage style proto-prog things like King Crimson, Yes, and of course, many parts of Pink Floyd. Things to take from prog, particularly modern prog, is its relationship with time. It is definitely not a genre of music that is happy-going 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of the timings that you find within this style of music are very interesting, can be very complex, and it is a very self-indulgent style of music where it is musicians musicianing. But I am the type of musician who likes to listen to other musicians musicianify at a musician-y level of musicianness. You're going to find a lot of odd measures like 7/4 and 5/4, and then you're going to have weird as hell type timings where it's going to look like the drummer basically rolled 2 Dungeons and Dragons style dice and went those two numbers will do. But even beyond timing, something that this genre does really amazingly is messing with song structures. Now, if you're a songwriter or a producer, it's brilliant to listen to these bands and see how they avoid going verse, chorus, bridge, outro, chorus. And not to mention some of the tonal diversity that these bands get. Nice. Number 3. Classical guitar. Now, as traditionalist as these styles of guitar can be, they carry with it a very large sense of beauty and drama, which is something I think every artist and every player should aspire to capture a little bit of. They'll also teach you a few abilities as a guitarist that you may not have had before or may not have even thought of before. First and foremost, your right hand and your finger picking technique is going to skyrocket. But beyond that, from a songwriting and an artistic point of view, something that classical and Spanish guitar will allow you to do is to form fully fledged, fully layered songs from one solo guitarist. A piece of music where you have both a rhythm and a melody, and even harmonies to that melody. And it's this kind of focusing on a simple individual instrument that I think carries with it a really somber beauty. There is something harrowing about it, there is something so personal about it. And for you to have the ability to form fully fledged pieces of music that aren't just simple chords but rhythm and melody all going at once, telling a story from one single player without any words, I think is quite amazing. And I think a lot of people pick up on that. And of course, like a lot of styles of music on this list, it's going to get you away from simply playing power chords and open chords or open style riffs. You're going to have a bit more of an appreciation for a depth of tone that you can draw out of your instrument. Number 4, old school 1930s blues. I think that every guitarist should do themselves the favor of listening to some old 30s blues. Not just because it is harrowingly dark and beautiful all at the same time and carries with it the weight of a race of people in abject slavery, but also because that is the basis for most of the guitar music to come over the past century. The blues slowly morphed into rock and roll slowly morphed into just rock, and off that shot metal and hardcore and punk, and every style of particularly Western guitar music that we use today. It's kind of like going back to the drawing board, not because it's a simple style of music, but because it is the seed that informed so much of what you're trying to do. You could honestly be sitting there being like, my favorite band is Thy Art Is Murder, and that's my style of thing. Great band, love them to death. In the evolutionary history, the bands they listen to, the bands they listen to, eventually going to get back to some old school, dark, gritty blues. Quick side note, when I say blues, I do not mean go listen to dad blues. Don't go to some 12-bar blues style 90s bar music that sounds like it's the soundtrack to a John Candy movie. None of this. No. Some really great places to start with this deep, dark, intense 1930s blues would be Blind Willie McTowell, Skip James, Son House, Blind Willie Johnson, Robert Johnson, of course. The positives that you should take from this style of music are much the same as with classical guitar and Spanish guitar. It's going to grant you the ability to have this fully fledged song within one instrument. The positives to take away from old school blues are very similar to that of, oddly enough, classical guitar and Spanish guitar. It's going to give you the ability to contain a whole nuanced piece of music within one instrument. A good understanding of some really dark and melancholy style note connections that you just don't find in other styles of music. You just don't find it anywhere else. You can talk about how closely connected rock is to blues and all that all you like, but that original style of blues has a voice that you cannot get anywhere else. Number 5. Psychedelia. Now I know what you're all thinking. You're all looking at me, looking at the background here, looking at all the patterns, the way I dress, and you're thinking, Brandon, you've never listened to psychedelia. What this very broad genre of music offers is different to all the other 4, because with jazz, with classical guitar, with prog, and with old school blues, you're talking about learning new theoretical things, relationships between notes that you want to use to infer certain emotions or certain dramas. But with psychedelia, it's much more of the gloves are off and we're out in the wild seeing what we can make with sound. You become less of a guitarist and more of a audio experimentation wizard. Fundamentally, the last 4 are very much about developing you as a guitarist, but this 5th one is much more about developing you as an artist whose medium is music. This genre spans everything, of course, from your great Pink Floyd style psychedelia, all the way through to more modern, sometimes even punk influenced psychedelia like King Gizzard. Great example to be in this one is to check out Crumbling Castles. The song structure and tones within this song are really bizarre and definitely are worth a listen. But there isn't really any technical idea or bit of theory that I want you to take from this style of music. I want you to listen to this and see how detached you can get from the idea of a pop song. A lot of psychedelia has a lot more of an emphasis on you as an artist instead of you as a guitarist or a drummer or a bass player or a singer. Think back in the day, Pink Floyd, Echoes. That's pushing what a song could be. That's a 30-minute extravaganza through how they feel. That's a whole soundtrack to a mindset. And I do believe that music should be more experimental, should be freer, and should be more tonally diverse. And songs should be longer and tell full-fledged stories. I mean, that's just my opinion and how I like to consume music. And so to bring it back down to earth now, with these 5 styles of music, I'd love for you to broaden your tonal landscape. Many of you already are. Many of you are already sitting there listening to and implementing these styles of music. But I guarantee you that there is at least one style of music on this list that you either have never tried before, or you don't listen to, or it's never really appealed to you, or there's something within it that you haven't yet gotten to. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Brandon Valentine here, and if you enjoyed listening to me rant inanely in my room with all the patterns about stuff, make sure to like and subscribe and press the little bell for notifications, because that's what everyone wants, me on a frequent basis popping up in their social media on all their devices like a long-haired, angry, cynical plague. See you guys next time.